Well, Pete, Kevina, thank you guys for being here today. Lovely having the two of you here for a fruitful discussion. We're here to talk about everyone's favorite topics. We're going to talk payroll, we're going to talk tech, and hopefully we're going to talk future of work. And I think from two perspectives that are going to be wonderful for everyone. The first one being global and worldwide. The second one, we're going to try to focus a little bit more on Africa, which I think is a hot topic as well at the moment. Pete, thank you for being here. I mean, you need no introduction, but for those that might not know you, which would be a shame, you're a global payroll expert. You're an advisor to some of the biggest companies in the world. You are an analyst, and you've basically have been working with companies to help them grow from a payroll perspective worldwide for decades. And thank you for being here today. We really value your time. And Kevina, thank you as well. I mean, Kevina, you're the head of operations at Africa HR. You are very familiar with payroll and very familiar especially with the challenges of running payroll in 46 African countries. So thank you for being here, Kevina. And I'll kick things off with you, Pete. I mean, everyone's hot topic at the moment is AI, and everyone wants to talk about AI. And everyone is a subject matter expert when it comes to AI. But I think very few actually understand what the repercussions of AI is going to be in the future, and especially from a payroll perspective. And I'm very keen to find out from you what's changing in payroll globally and what's AI's role in this big change.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I love this conversation. I love that question. Look, I mean, for a very long time, we've been starving for innovation and technology in payroll, right? We've been doing this sort of brain surgery job with caveman tools in a lot of regards, right? And a lot of outdated stuff, a lot of innovation that wasn't necessarily integrated, not necessarily designed for the user. It was designed for the process. And so what I think you're having is there's a convergence occurring, right? We have this awareness and an awakening, I think, of what payroll is and what it should have been all along. And that's rooted in just the compliance that's raging, right? We've got a lot of change coming. There's workforce dynamics that are changing. And there's just very much the opportunity with digital now for organizations to do more with less. But also go further, right? And be able to reach places that they maybe hadn't before. And so all of that is creating this opportunity, I think, in addition to all the innovation that's changing everything, for payroll to also level up and change. And I think what you're finding is that the value of payroll is becoming more apparent and extracted because of technology, right? And because of this immense impact it's having on the practitioners who hold tremendous skill sets. They're business leaders, right? Sitting in payroll, who have one of the richest data sets in all the organization. And so when you think about that in context with what businesses are trying to do as they grow, as they contract, as they expand, all of that data becomes incredibly important. And particularly as we move into this automation and augmentation age where AI is really doing a lot of the work, and we're fundamentally focusing on the anomalies and making decisions about that data and that process. And so I think ultimately that's this new awakening for payroll is really like, hey, there's a lot of real value here strategically to enable what we need to do. There's a tremendous amount of data here to help us see around the next corner with other data when we pair it together. And if we don't have these things in place, we're going to step in some sort of a hole and cause problems around compliance and derail our path. So I think there's just an awakening, right? That's happening from the top down in C-suites. And payroll always knew it, right? We were always trying to communicate that upward, and now we're being heard much more because I think it's really here, right? There's this sort of urgency that has come about now with HR and payroll, and it's very, very exciting.
And bouncing off of that, because we're going to talk AI and we're going to talk payroll, sure, but how many companies would you say are actually ready for it, or how many have a plan in place to tackle those changes?
Yeah, probably most aren't. And I'll say this because, you go back to that data, right? I mean, at the core of every large language model in AI is going, or even small language model is going to be data. And if your data is not in a good place, you're not able to trust it. You can't flow it across your landscape. You're not integrated with your systems, your key business systems. That AI is not going to be able to do what it needs to do. And I'll give you a great example. I was walking down the hall the other day at a major talent technology event. I study the HCM space very widely. And I was speaking with this very high level executive who's in charge of development, learning and development for her company. And I was asking the softwares they were using, and I asked if what their ambitions were with AI, and she said, well, we want to do this, we want to do that. And I said, are you ready to do that? And she smiled. And I said, what core HR system are you on? And it was not a modern cloud system. It was one of the outdated, maybe legacy systems, on-prem solutions, right? And I said, how are you going to do these things? And again, she smiled, but she said, I really don't know. And she didn't know the timeline for when they're going to move to the cloud. So you can imagine, like, how are you going to really be able to hit a home run if you can't get your feet set in the bat? I'm using American baseball analogy, but there's a lot of fundamentals that have to happen before you can take advantage of those flashy things. And I would argue AI is a bit of a flashy thing until you have the data and the integrity of that data in order to be able to work with it. So there's a lot of getting in shape, I think a lot of firms need to do. But the good news is most enterprises and even smaller companies are getting mandates from their ownership and their boards to say, hey, you've got to get this in play. And that's finding its way, out of the front facing customer end, and now making its way to the back office. And there's an expectation that this can be super impactful for HR, IT for sure, finance. You could go on and on through the back office and see where automation is going to be able to really alleviate a lot of that, minutia, ticking and tying of the past payroll, and allow people to really, put that emotional intelligence and those deep skills they have to play with that data. And that's what really excites me.
And it also goes with something that I believe companies are more and more aware of, which is changes also starts with the people. Now, you talked
Yes.
about data set, you talked about automation, you talked about tech. I'm curious because as an advisor yourself, how do you assist? How do you work with your clients and companies that are talking a big game about tech, about AI, and
Yeah.
about all those tools that are out there, but have yet to get their employees on board? So my
Yeah.
question is, how do you balance out the requirement for tech and the upskilling of the people that are going to be
Yeah.
operating?
Yeah, well, look, I think for especially for HR and payroll, this is all largely going to be rooted deeply in trust, right? Can I trust that this technology is doing what I would be doing if I was sitting there processing the payroll or managing the onboarding process for an employee, or fill in the blank on any skill, right? Or any experience. And I think what that means is that companies have to come to the understanding. Again, is the data right? If the data is bad, it's not going to matter. You're going to get bad data out. If the data is there and you have the infrastructure, again, that's where, if you think about it, the people are living with these processes now, right? And that's where the information, that's where the future lies, is human enabled intelligence, right? You taking our emotional intelligence and compounding it with AI's ability to do the things that we don't want or shouldn't be doing, right? And so, the idea of straight through machine enabled processing for payroll is an absolute blessing. Right now, the Kevinas of the world can take that immense experience that she and her team have and apply that to that data and that insight, and go and be partners, strategic advisory type partners to the businesses that they serve, right? And that's true even for a payroll in-house, right? The ability for them to then return value back to the business as a strategic advisor, a guidance, someone saying, hey, think about this, helping you model out, plans and looking to avoid those compliance risks and missteps, and pair that data with other data around the organization and externally. And what happens next? Maybe the company can see around the corner, right, and predict, and it just really becomes very, very compounded and infinite. And so, again, I think the root of this is human intelligence paired with artificial intelligence is really going to be the power. And I'll tell you this, it really makes me happy is I'm talking to, I spend a lot of time advising firms like yourself, right? The technology of firms of the world that make these solutions. but I study the buyers and what they need and what they're thinking. And one of the things that makes me really happy is I'm seeing it, particularly in global payroll, right? As bigger companies are going out and looking at outsourcing and getting help. I think they're looking past that tech and saying, okay, the tech is table stakes, right? But show me the Kevina, right? Show me the Sally, the Bob, whoever the human is behind this, that's going to make sure that this thing behaves and does what it's supposed to do and it's performing correctly. And show me the person who's going to lead my payroll into the future with the help of this technology. And I think that's really refreshing, right? We're not kind of in that regard throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're very much, taking what we have, which is, tremendous human talent, and powering that up and amplifying that with technology. And that's what this should be about in the end, regardless of the process.
I love what you're saying. And Kevina, I'm not sure if you can relate, but Pete, you've mentioned the word human very often in that response. And we're talking AI and tech, yet the notion of human is still very much dominant in this industry. Kevina, with what Pete is saying, how has your management with your team evolved when it comes to your view as a payroll outsourcing firm, but also as an advisor yourself? How have you seen that human approach impact your team, your clients in general?
I think we'll all start. I think the foundation was right. The foundation was to have like a semi-manual processes and curate data. I think I'm enjoying this era now because there's availability of data, and we've been able to get the right data from source, right? So I wouldn't say that we have missed a train when it comes to AI. I would say AI certainly is a strategic enabler for us. I will try to expand in terms of what I'm saying here. So basically, we've been able to do more with less because we know exactly what data we need to probably look at building algorithm, and that we could only articulate this based on what we've done in the past. Now, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We could just piggyback on what's there already. So what we've done is, like looking at multiple pay cycle, looking at pay on demand. And before, we wouldn't even dream of doing this. But now with the availability of data and how we can lean on predictive analytics, we've been able to sort of bespoke the model. So data literacy is definitely 100% there. And I don't believe the payroll consultant now see themselves as processor. They see themselves as strategic advisor in a way because we can pick up anomalies straight away. So I guess the whole role of a payroll consultant now has been redefined and has reinforced compliance in terms of what we do, because we can pick up anomalies based on what we've seen as the data trend. So that give rise to us in terms of how we're building our data model when we come to bespoking the service delivery model. So that's very exciting for us. And number two, I think it pushed us to look at things and look at the bigger picture in terms of how we can redesign the thinking around and advising the client on how they should look at the payroll service delivery model. So we've been able to look at regionalization. We've been able to having one single point of contact in terms of, again, for the client to be more cost efficient, but also better in terms of compliance.
And bouncing on that, with the clients you're currently dealing with and you've been dealing with over the years, I'm guessing not a lot of them are actually aware of the delicacies of doing payroll across Africa and across the different legislations. How many are ready and how many are not? And how do you navigate this? Because as Pete was talking about advising them, I'm sure you find yourself in that position.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's no one size fits all when it comes to this, because there is different sort of level when it comes to readiness, right? So some are semi-manual as we speak, some are fully digitalized, some are still very much on the legacy and paper base. But the ability to navigate through these complexities and the ability to bespoke model based on the current stage in terms of where they are, in terms of the AI enhanced model, I guess our role is to advise them, but also to make sure that there's a timeline, there's a roadmap, and we remain with the client when it comes to make them compliant, fully compliant. So I would say that my answer to your question, Alex, is we need to sort of understand their current ecosystem because it does vary country to country. the geopolitical sort of variances in those countries are quite scary in a way to say it, because it can changes happen overnight. So how do you, as a payroll advisor and consultant working towards making sure that people get paid, stay ahead of the curve? So what we've done is look at what can be automated and streamlined from the start, and still those that are not ready in terms of automation and still are paper-based, we focus on this in terms of reinforcing compliance. So I don't think there is categorization here or segmentation. Is how you live with your client in terms of the current legislation and landscape.
I think, Pete, you must be fighting the same battle than we are on a different battlefield, because I'm hearing Kevina talk about not just educating on Africa in general from a payroll perspective, but also, realigning priorities from the clients. Now, what would you say are the challenges you see companies face when they are looking to expand and centralize in a way their payroll from their own headquarters, while they are looking at multi-country opportunities? What do you see are their challenges? What are they not doing?
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is that for so many organizations, payroll is a catalyst buy and a catalyst moment, right? It's solved at the point of pain. I've lost something, a system, a great manager. We've divested something. We've bought something. Often it's cobbled together, right? It happens to you. Payroll happens to you. It's not necessarily invested in. And I think we're seeing some changes in that attitude, which I could talk about, but that might be a different maybe session here. But the point here is what happens is, I think a lot of organizations let payroll happen to them on a multi-country level. And now more than ever, right now, you're seeing smaller companies even get pulled into this because they see opportunity to grow their businesses. They see opportunities. Everyone should be seeing opportunities with talent beyond borders, right? So you're finding these very long tail fragmented footprints that are popping up at a younger and younger maturity for corporations. But bigger companies, I think, particularly find themselves at some point at a breaking point where they've acquired things and cobbled things together and retained investments maybe that they had in one place or the other because of contracts or whatever the case might be. If you're not solving it all at one time, which most firms frankly don't do, they can, but they don't. They're often solving it in the moment as it becomes that problem. And so what I think you see is that becomes very challenging, right? Because you become somewhat fragmented, you stay fragmented, and you have a modular sort of solution, but it might not necessarily be integrated well. It might not necessarily be harmonized. And so it just gets really choppy. And I think you're seeing a lot of organizations start to now look at global payroll platforms in a different way to see if if it's possible to harmonize, and it is, to a single point. But I think the reality of it is that payroll is hyper local, right? It's incredibly local experience. It's incredibly locally driven. But organizations want a global, infrastructure and a global view, a global set of data, right? And that makes total sense. And so what I've seen varies across companies, but certainly I think the regional and local payrolls is still powering a lot of the payroll out there, and largely partnering with many of the bigger firms to help and make this a lot easier. And I think companies, the thing that I love about what Kevina was saying a little while ago is the modularity of what you can do now with extensibility from integrations, but also just the way you can bite off or digest services, right? So for example, Africa, right? Very complicated, very, very complicated region to be operating in, holds a lot of opportunity, right? Something like, we did a podcast on this. I think it's like 1.3 million workers, something like 60% is in a youthful age. And so there's a lot of opportunity for talent. There's a lot of tech growth there. But it comes with also a lot of pain and compliance, and it comes with a lot of antiquated ways of doing things, as are a lot of countries. And so I think you've got to understand that you can't come from your home country, be that US, be that UK, and assume that you're going to be able to apply apples to apples, the same process, the same infrastructure, and the same practices. It's just not likely. It's going to be very different flavors in every one of those countries, and you often need expertise and localized technology to help you solve that without a lot of failures. And so that's where I think the modularity of saying, hey, I'm not good at this area of the globe or region or piece at this time, or I don't want to be. Let me have a partner that can easily integrate into my solution and become sort of an arm's length team for me. And I think that's what I really love about managed services today is I don't have to go out and do, all in, buy it all, do everything all at once. I can just sort of take it as and when my need arises and grow with that solution, sort of a land and expand. And it be there for me and best part of all is I can retain my investments where I am good, where I do well, and complement the gaps where I'm not. And so I think that's a real benefit of the solutions in the market now.
But Pete, you know what? You've
Yeah.
mentioned something, and sorry, Kevina, but you've mentioned something. How many clients are willing to request help? And the both of you obviously have that experience. You talked about
Yeah.
clients wanting to understand the complexities of expanding into multi-country. How many are actually willing to ask for help to outsource? And how many do you guys have seen that are simply not interested in expanding via outsourcing, want to keep it in-house and learn
Yeah.
from their own mistakes? Kevina, I'm sure you've seen that plenty.
I think what I would just, how I would respond to this, Alex, is a bit different. I think they are not even aware in terms of the risk. So, and how we've been able to sort of help them to, in a way, educating them is quantifying the cost of risk, quantifying the risk of not being compliant. Because many times out of, let's say, 10 mandate or 10 big project having their headquarters in US or UK, they believe, like Pete just mentioned, it's a very standard model that they will just plug and play across. And even plug and play across Africa, different countries is not the same, So what I would probably do this is like taking the core processes in terms of what the client wants, and then like plug it in each country, and then sort of a simulation in terms of how that would be, So it's definitely quite complex, but also I think what Pete was saying, and I 100% agree, is we need to let them know that culturally and the ecosystem of each of those countries really differ. So you will need to just map it out for them in terms of how the whole payroll system will be ticking.
Yeah. Look, I think payroll outsourcing, and look, I don't even like to use the word outsourcing anymore because I don't think I think it's a very negative. I'll say why. I don't think it's wrong. I'm just saying, I think it's a very negative sort of legacy thought process of, well, we're just doing, our mess for less. And what I think is important to understand is that you're really now buying technology enabled managed services, right? And what that means is managed services with experts who do this for a living, enabled by innovation that they've invested in. And so what I often tell buyers is look, the idea of sort of your mess for less is gone, right? You're fundamentally stepping out into a transformative innovation cycle, innovation engine that you're not going to develop on your own as a buyer, right? Many companies aren't going to go and develop world-class payroll technology. They're going to go and license that and leverage that from vendors around the marketplace. And so what I think you see is even the best shared services organization in the world still needs technology that they likely didn't develop. And often can't cover every single part of the globe. They can be very strong maybe in one region, but they often start to fall apart after that. And I think that's where you have to admit that and say, hey, we need help. And the market is incredibly healthy. I mean, payroll outsourcing has been rising for some time now, and I think it's only going to intensify for these three reasons. Number one, you've got a shrinking talent pool of payroll people around the world. If you look at the Payroll Profession Confidence Index that I just published, the 2025, 49% of the people from 31 countries that responded have over 20 years experience, right? The next band of 11 to 19 years is about 30%. So we've got 70% of the world's population of payroll leaders fundamentally on the path to retirement. And we're not exactly bringing people in as fast, any faster than we had in the past, which was already anemic, right? So we're losing talent. It's getting harder, right? We just had 2024 was the biggest election in probably maybe world history, right? We had 50% of the global, the GDP around the world went to the polls. The EU Parliament, the US presidency, many big elections. what does that mean, right? Incumbents and new people are going to come in and they're going to enact change and they're going to enact their rules and the things that they want to do. We're already seeing it here in America with the big beautiful bill. You're going to see it in other places. So that's going to create a pop in compliance. So it's going to get more painful. And then last, to your point about technology, you've got most big companies out there, not most, but many aren't not entirely where they need to be from a payroll transformation or even an HR transformation perspective. It's the innovation's coming faster and faster and faster. They're not going to proliferate it on their own. They're going to have to go and get this from someplace. Either they do it as a SaaS model and do the work themselves, which is perfectly acceptable, or they're going to need to go and get some help. And I think you're just going to continue to see more and more of an appetite for managed payroll services as this complexity intensifies, innovation just becomes more and more rapid, and it's worth stepping into that turnkey model that says, I have the people, process, and technology to power my payroll forward into the future. And I don't have to worry about payroll anymore because I know it's going to be fortified and laying that foundation for my business. And so I think you're just going to continue to see, we already are. You can go look at the market sizes out there. You can see it's going to continue to rise. And I think it's going to pace it up as we lose more and more talent.
Yeah, I think what we've seen as well is the availability of data. So today, after capturing the clean data for 4 to 5 years, we've been able to build algorithm. So that's right. Something that came up automatically by default. So we've been able to look at how we can, look at different business cycle and how to be really, really compliant. Just don't want to share too much here. But today we got, a request to just, based on the reports we've been sharing, we pick up anomalies, and it seems like there is room to look into it further to see if there was some sort of let's not call it fraud, but unethical sort of spend. That wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have data, if we didn't be looking at data analytics, and behavioral analytics. I think for the past few years we were very, very fixated on behavioral analytics, but now we've shifted 100% on predictive.
Yeah. No, it's very powerful. I had on my podcast recently a conversation with a leader in a very, very big organization. I think they have like 500,000 employees just in one country. And I believe she was telling me that they have a goal on just leakage, right? Just time leakage and errors and different things within their payroll process from the workforce management side through that mean tens of millions of dollars for the business. And so I think those savings are very material, and that sort of savings turns around and pays for any investment of tech anyway there. So they're almost self-funding in a lot of ways. So there's so much opportunity for improvement and just fortifying the business from these compliance failures with AI that it's just exciting.
Yeah, I mean, for us, even we've been able to, make a bit of cost saving for our clients. So better budgeting, and because of data, because of what we've been mining for them. So that's really handy, and it's nothing to do in terms of our service, but yet it becomes as an output of managed services, which is great.
It's interesting hearing the two of you talk, because you have the same alignment on the fact that the data is there, the tools are there, but it does sound like companies also need to be aware of internally what do they want, and externally how do they action on those data. Because it sounds like the data overload is real as well, but the inaction is potentially even more dangerous than any misuse of AI. It really sounds like...
This is a key finding in the Payroll Profession Confidence Index this year. I hate to keep shamelessly plugging it, but it's great. It really is great research. And one of the things that we found, and I say this to the buyers that I do work with, I tell them, what do you want to be when you grow up when it comes to payroll? And what you'll find is that many organizations don't actually have a vision or a strategy for payroll, especially for global organizations. This is so critical. But we have data now that shows that when you do have a vision and a strategy, you know what the end game you're trying to aim towards, and you're building towards that with the right mix of people, process, tech, partners, whatever, that you have a far greater output of maturity and impact and value add and ROI and executive engagement. So there's a significant benefit to beginning with the end in mind, right? I guess Stephen Covey, right? begin with the end in mind. Know where you want to be when what you want your payroll operation to be, which should be ultimately supporting the strategy of the business, and build towards that accordingly. Because otherwise, what you find is, think back to what I was saying earlier about how a lot of most payroll buys are hyper reactive, right?
Yeah.
We're not seeing companies run out and get in line at the Apple store for the next, payroll 17, right? They're not doing that. They're buying based on a pain or a moment that something has happened. And so if we can get out of that and get to an investment, I think we could see a whole world's difference output from payroll and impact. But that takes time, and so I think it starts with understanding what you want to be versus sort of saying we're going to do global payroll and just go at it. Ready, fire, aim. It's got to be ready, aim, fire, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of folks are just sort of transforming absent an actual vision, and that vision is so critical.
And I like the way you just said about, let's start with the end in mind. And this is the absolute practice what we do when it comes to implementation of managed services models. So what we do is once we have our implementation kickoff meeting, we'll ask the client exactly what they want in terms of milestone, which day the guys needs to get paid. So then we reverse engineer the whole process and we automate as much as we could so that we can bespoke the model. And what I've seen for our payroll consultant who's been with us for a while now, they are no more payroll consultant. They are more implementation analysts, because they know exactly what can be done from a system perspective. And then we can sort of recommend workflows between our system and the client's system so that we can really disrupt the whole way we do things. And one is reduce turnaround time, but second is really reinforcing compliance and, of course, making sure these people get paid on time.
Yeah. That's really the partnership that folks I think need to be shopping for is someone that's going to guide them and sort of show them what they don't know, and say, hey, look, there's a better way of doing this. Let us help you clean this up based on our, leading practice and expertise, and get you on that path and get you towards that vision. And so, I love that. It's very much a partnership. You should be buying a partnership, not just it's not bureau style services anymore.
And what has really helped us and helped the client mainly is bringing the on the ground realities under the spotlight. For example, we know in particular countries there is more rigor in terms of compliance check at the bank. So we sort of embed that in our model. And that you will not get anywhere on the net or it's just underground reality.
Yeah, that is so key. I don't think people really understand that sort of long tail, the last mile activities that go on in some of these countries. It's relationships, and it's walking down to an office and shaking a hand and saying something to someone, or being able to pick up the phone and deal with an issue when you have that sort of understanding and language and culture and people know each other. It's a much different experience than when you're trying to deliver at arm's length from another shore. That is so incredible. And I think, Kevina, I believe there's still some African nations that require you to bring signed wet ink.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah, that's,
the filing needs to be done in person. Yeah. And then we need to track this in terms of the stamp, the date. A couple of countries at our end that we're still on.
Global payroll is hyper local.
Yeah.
I think it also touches with the expectations of clients. Because I'm sure they're expecting countries like Nigeria, Kenya that have, government portals and digitized platforms where you would think that everything is now online. Yeah. But then you have countries where indeed you need to file the paperwork, over there at the office. I mean, how do you work around that?
I think we've been able to do country-specific SOPs just to manage expectation. So like Pete and I just mentioned, like some are still on the legacy model, paper-based, but at the same time, where the client is sitting and what they're expecting is like, if there's 6 countries they're working in Africa, they will have the same timeline. It's not like that. So sort of like educating them in terms of country specificity is very important. So what we've done to sort of work around this is put specific timeline for each country and what would be the, an expected sort of like buffer to make sure that everything fits into place. And compliance is very, very key. It's quite a lot of work because there's a lot of changes in legislation happening in Africa. So that's where we give heads up to our client. But again, is making sure that we're on the same page when it comes to timeline and staying compliant.
And Pete, I would love your feedback on it because we're now getting into some dangerous territory. Compliance and risk. We spoke AI, we spoke tech. We're now also diving into Africa. What are the main risks you're seeing nowadays and you're seeing from clients looking at expanding without the proper structure internally, without the proper strategy? What have been some of the risks? How do you advise those companies to avoid those risks and remain compliant?
Yeah, well, again, here again, right? You don't know what you don't know, and I think that sometimes it's almost like finding out later that you've almost had an accident that you didn't realize you had, right? Oh my, we were in this danger. I don't. Again, going beyond your home country, you can't assume apples to apples, right? You can't assume that Africa or wherever, anywhere, Asia, anywhere is going, any country is going to do things exactly the way you did them where you were, and so you have to respect that localization, right? There's currencies, languages, many different things that have to be played into factor. And if you don't have the technology or the expertise there, you're no doubt going to step into a situation where you maybe get fined, get in trouble, right? Ruin the brand, maybe cause missteps, and worse, if you're operating there absent the ability with the business nexus to do so. Same as here in the United States, you can't just fundamentally operate in all 50 states without setting up business nexus and being able to set up tax accounts and have relationships with the local tax agencies in order to deposit. You can't just send money to them absent that. And so all of those things often I think are common, but I think the biggest one is that people think often they can put folks in a region or employ them, call them contractors, pay them and a decent salary or whatever they agree to, and everything's going to be fine. Well, the definition of contractor in one place is not the same as it is in another. It's different from state to state sometimes here in America. So you can't just assume all those things. And I think that organizations are waking up to that, because the fines and the penalties and the embarrassment, right, are detrimental to strategic paths, and you can't continue to grow if you're stymied by a court problem or some sort of a employment case, right? And that obviously scales as you have higher volumes and you go to more countries. So I think there's just a lot of risk in the unknown for buyers and customers who are out there navigating this by themselves, absent the attorneys or the tax CPAs or whatever you need in each country to help you fortify and build all that. It's very difficult. And I think when you think about the speed and the timing of being able to enter a country confidently, and employ and care for your people and do it the right way, and know that you're not going to deal with these missteps or blunders has to be very comforting. It should be very comforting. No different than it is here in America going from one state to another. I think you have to take it even more serious because you probably know even less about the country that you might be going to. So very important that in that regard. And I think that's what people should know to be worried about. I don't know that everybody knows that though.
And also, I think, in my view, AI has really enhanced compliance, because like I rightly mentioned, we've been able to pick up red flags at a very, very early stage instead of it translating in terms of like an issue and a compliance issue, and then there's penalty. So I would tend to be an advocate that AI has also helped us in terms of, enabling more the security side of things. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite use case probably for payroll is the compliance element of this, just to be able to crawl the world, right? And surface back to the payroll leaders what's changing and what to do about it and how to think about it. And eventually we might be talking about, updating tables and testing parallels and running parallel tests and load tests and all of that, and making sure, and then coming back to you and saying, hey, it's ready to go. I think that's going to be a huge lift off the payroll team to be able to focus on.
Like I was saying before, I think the role of my team now has really shifted in understanding outliers. So what we'll do is we'll get the system to process it, bulk load, bulk import, and the bulk processing. And then we'll be picking up the outliers and trying to understand and elaborate the root causes. And that's really leveraging on the payroll knowledge more than just getting them to do payroll processing. And that being said, that's where we then engage with the client to further understand the root causes. The role of the payroll consultant has really, really shifted. Yeah. So then, like what I'm saying, it has reinforced security at our end.
Yeah. The role, but the value too. I think the value output, right, is just more immense now. I mean, it's not this sort of manual, slow moving thing. It's now, hey, I have the expertise to match with the data and I can tell you what to do with it. That's so huge. So
So
huge.
huge, yeah. And also, I think
Yeah.
in terms of retention, because at the end of the day, we're
Yeah.
touching the most sensitive side of things is people's pay.
Yeah.
And most of the time we get the client who said, okay, we got contractors across 20 countries in Africa, but we want to make sure the experience and employee experience is the same. So then we try to bring that in specific countries and then mock the model and make it something like that. But at the end of the day, there's so much you can standardize, but there is, the component where we need to still make it very localized. So there's a right blend between standardization and bespoking, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that all the contractors remain engaged
Yeah.
and get.
But it's interesting. Out of the two of you, we don't talk enough about the contractors, the employees themselves that are going to be
Yeah.
clearly the main impacted here. How much would you say they're going to be impacted, and how much out of the strategy should be driven towards enhancing their choices and their pay and their lives in general? How much emphasis should go towards them?
Yeah, I have a very visionary outlook of what I call payroll everywhere. I put it out a few years ago, and it's something I think we could see in the future. And again, it's not here; it's conceptual. But let me maybe explain a little bit and talk about what I think the future experience could be for employees. You think about the concept of again data, right? My payroll data. I've got investment data. I probably have maybe some data that's coming from my 401k or insurances or whatever the employer might provide, but things also privately, right? The reality of it is today that most employees probably aren't super skilled at understanding their paycheck. I know you probably know Kevina Takoordyal you get, right? Like there's a lot of question marks, and some of it is not things that that employees just inherently know and understand. And I think that that's a huge opportunity, right? Helping employees with more trust and transparency around their pay, explaining it to them, and giving them their own concierge, if you will, right? Chatbots, right? AI enabled chat. Those things are fantastic. The self-explaining payslip is already in the market. And now if you were to democratize the data around that, right? The things that are not necessarily happening in your lanes of work, whether you're a contractor or an employee, and you start to bring in those private investment data and your banking data and your maybe your goals that you're trying to achieve. And what if, right? All of that starts to talk together to where you have this picture of your health, wealth, and retirement being enabled by AI and nudging you to give you the right answer at the right times. Hey, for example, a great example here in America is if I'm a let's say I'm an employee and I work as a computer programmer somewhere on my full-time job. But then on the evenings, I'm a DJ and I have this little business where I go and DJ weddings and parties and whatever. And I've got a stream of income coming from both of those, right? And we see this more often now, right? Multi-streams of income, particularly with Gen Z and others. They want that, I guess, safety, right? And as they should, very entrepreneurial, right? But how do I connect all that data together, right? Because I'm having one lane of taxes and viewpoint from my employer. I've got a whole other from my independent contracting work that are not married together and not necessarily being taxed at the same time, right? And again, I've got all these other things that I'm maybe saving or putting money away or my employer is, providing for me. How do I connect the dots on all those things to make me hyper efficient with my health, wealth, and retirement, right? So for example, if I work in one employer and I am also an IC, someone might, the data might be able to say to me, hey, look, if you were to take a little bit of money, you're going to be under withheld, but if you would put a little bit of your money in more into your 401k, it's tax deferred. It'll bring down your tax amount that you owe, and you would basically save money by investing money and reduce your tax liability. Well, I may not know that if I'm not a payroll expert or a CPA, and I might not be able to afford a CPA. But now with all of that data talking together and nudging me and showing me insights, I think employees are going to be able to make much better decisions. And there's also going to be a greater amount of trust between employee and employer because now I'm getting help that I need to be financially well and mentally well and all of that to be productive. But more importantly, I'm actually being empowered to do more and better with my money to help me reach my goals. And so that's going to take a lot, right? That's going to require a lot of democratization and a lot of trust and a lot of technology to be in place. But the point is, you can see where this could go, right? You could see where employees could grant access to, and there's apps out there that will merge data on various different things, right? And so you could see this coming. And I believe what we're talking about is a payroll experience that is fundamentally always on. It's always orbiting the employee, right? Continuous calculation and on-demand pay and same-day FX, cross-border FX. All of those things are coming together, and I think it's creating a breakdown of pay cycles and a democratization of payroll, where the employee is largely going to maybe be in control of their pay and payroll in the future. And that will create, I think, a much different relationship with pay and a trust factor and a transparency that we haven't seen in the past, that we all deserve. And I think that that's, again, very, very exciting stuff, I think, for the employee. Very futuristic, but I think you can see how AI can answer questions and surface insights and fundamentally just help people make better decisions with their pay.
I've seen that already in terms of the question we get asked by
Yeah.
some of the contractors. So it's all about, financial wealth and how we can, especially before
Yes.
they even want to move country, they will want to know what will be the tax bracket, how much the payout will be, what are the benefits before they even make the decision of taking the job. So
Yeah.
it's not even coming from the client, it's more from the contractor asking that type of question. And that's already what you're saying, Pete.
Yeah.
So
They deserve that.
they deserve that. They deserve
Yeah.
that.
And look, with all this data as an employer, why couldn't I model that and provide a little dossier, if you will, portfolio to say, hey, here's kind of what we're talking about in terms of your compensation. I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
And talent
Yeah.
mobility in Africa is something that happened like over the past
Yeah.
few years now. So it's more you go with your contractor instead of going with your client. So
Yeah.
and they see, as I've seen some of our contractors, that they move job, but they still come back to us, in terms
That's
of the
great. That's
experience,
great.
because, and
Yeah.
that's really what I believe are our true brand ambassador, because it's all
Yes.
about the experience they had when we were doing the pay, So
Yeah.
how we've been able to sort of mitigate risks for them, how we've been able to give them heads up in terms of the change in legislation, in terms of, like if they are moving from, let's say, African countries, but they still need money to send in their hometown in US, for example. What's the best way to do this and still remain compliant? So all this in the package of managed services, but then we don't talk about it. We just think we're just doing payroll, but it's much more to this.
But I'm gonna ask you the $1,000,000 question to both of you, because you have hinted at chatbots that are going to basically be able to resolve queries even faster, and we're going to have that approach where payroll professionals are going to be advisors to companies. But towards the end, where does the human aspect, the human touch, fits in all of that? Because I believe now that we have AI and chatbots and we have a lot of predictive elements coming in, where will the human approach fit in all this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I want to say this, and then I'll turn it over to Kevina. We're well beyond chatbots. Let's be honest, right? We're already at agentic, right? Which means we've got basically AI that can autonomously go off and be agents, right? Be a compensation agent, be a payroll agent, be a processing agent, an auditor. And that's wonderful, right? Because now the payroll leader has 8 arms, right? There's 8 of them to do the work, and that's very, 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 very amazing. I think there's just a lot of opportunity, as you pointed out, right, to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. What's going to power the AI is going to be trained, skilled, qualified professionals, payroll professionals, HR professionals who can oversee this technology and guardrail, the actions that it's taking against what it should be doing, right? And I think that's where the human intelligence is just going to be absolutely more valuable than ever. And you think about the skills of a payroll leader, right? Adaptability, negotiation, analytic thinking, technology driven, all the things that you want in a payroll manager, they already have and they're doing. Now that's going to be so amplified in the augmentation age. You can go look, there's a World Economic Forum plot chart of the skills that are going to be needed in the future. All of those emotional intelligence things are way up in the right corner, and it reads like a payroll leader's job description. So I think it's all about, harnessing and saying, hey, we're going to be able to unlock this rich expertise that we have, that these business leaders, I'd emphasize business leaders that happen to sit in payroll. And oh, by the way, they've got one of the richest, if not the richest data sets in the organization. We can now go to them just like we would a big four and get some sort of consultation and support as we're making decisions. That's the value. That's the future. And I think it's just super exciting. But again, baby with the bathwater, we got to keep that human intelligence in lockstep, if not ahead of the AI, and having it training the AI and guardrailing the AI and making sure that it's behaving properly. And the outcomes will be amazing.
Kevina, I'm sure you see it as well with your teams when it comes to that, let's just say, advising kind of guide that you're bringing. How much now are you relying on, let's just say, tools, and how much of it are you still relying on interpersonal relationships, on guiding your clients?
I think for me, it will stay as the right blend between AI and human-centric approach, because there's a whole cultural sensitivity around this. So as much as we get the process to be automated, but at the end of the day, when you haven't got paid and there's like few hours late, you want to talk to a person at the end of on the phone, right? So what we try to do is, yes, we automate as much as we can when it comes to processes, but advising our client, resolving the queries, I would tend to believe this needs to stay with people, because we cannot remove empathy. And when you come to these questions, what they want to have is someone who understands their pain and tell them exactly what's happening and how it's going to get resolved. As much as we have data, this we will not have, because every situation is unique in itself, because we're dealing with a unique person at the end of the day. So that's where we've leveraged both people approach and also AI enhanced techniques at our end. But I must say it's a beautiful sort of blend, and we keep people very close to our heart.
Yeah, and I mean, Pete, just towards a little bit of a topic, we spoke about risk, we've spoken about compliance. I'm quite eager to talk about data and data risk as well. I'm sure with the clients you have, we talked about internally, they are revisiting their own structure and their own data management. What have been some of the mistakes you've seen companies do when it comes to their data and the management of that data? How many breach have you seen? How many issues have you even yourself flagged with them?
Yeah.
What are the main issues you've seen with data?
Yeah, I've researched this a bit. Well, so look, I would tell you that first and foremost, I think one of the biggest issues is you see a lot of organizations that are holding off on cloud transformation, right? Having a centralized, modern, extensible database for their HR data and payroll data. So that's probably misstep one, is putting off getting on the cloud. I think the other thing you find is I think oftentimes I think there's an assumption that payroll is purely bookkeeping, right? And thankfully that is dying. But there's a lot of folks that I think are executives that still look at it as this sort of transactional process, and there's not a lot of value in anything else there. And that's a mistake, right? Overlooking the risk, the impact, the value, all of that, and more importantly, the data. I think is foolish. And a lot of organizations don't even bother with the data because they just don't understand it and don't necessarily trust it because they have a fragmented payroll environment, right? And so that I think is a significant concern as well. And then I think fundamentally is just the health of the data, right? Again, when you've got a lot of systems, when you've got a lot of hands in the pot, when you don't have a lot of harmonization, you're going to have data reliability issues. You're going to have the inability, even if you can manually put it together perfectly, for it to become stale as soon as you've prepared it. It's not real time, right? And that in this modern environment, I think that real time insight is what you really have to be after, right? The ability to predict, to maybe even prescribe in some ways, and bring data together in a way that says, I want to be able to see around the next corner. I want to be able to understand what's coming. And payroll data has to be a big part of that. It's often the most accurate data. I mean, it's where we call when we change anything in our lives, we call payroll first,
yes.
Right? And so, go down there and have a conversation with your payroll team. There's incredible insights and incredible data sets down there. And I think that's the key part. So it's getting healthy, right? It's like having the right database, having good integrations to flow that data across your landscape, and having a data set that you can actually trust and know that you can maintain. I think all of those things are the missteps most organizations are having right now. And I think a lot of folks are trying to get that data fitness going right now to get ready.
And I mean, Kevina, just to bounce off what Pete has been saying all along, we know that when companies are expanding, they're looking at a legal aspect first, they're looking at the financial aspect second, they're looking at their potential risk and whatnot. And I know, unfortunately, payroll always fall towards the end of the scheme of segments they're looking at. Based on your experience and the risk associated as well, where would you say a proper, let's say, analysis and reshifting of the payroll strategy should be for these companies, especially in Africa, while they are expanding, while they are moving pieces around? Where does payroll fit for you in all this?
I think it's getting, like I mentioned earlier, is getting the right data from start. So what we will be looking is at the very early stage of the value chain is on the onboarding aspect, how we even redesign the contract just to make sure that we get the right data. Because at the end of the day, if the work order or the contract is not, they don't have data-rich set and information for us to process, then we will just, garbage in, garbage out. So what we are doing now is enhancing this data literacy from very start, so working with key people in both at the client end and our end, just to make sure how we design template to get those sort of data to us. Once this is done, then what comes after is quite smooth, because you can have 100% confidence in the data veracity, And so for me is giving that knowledge in terms of data strategy to the right people. It's not even the payroll consultant, So it's people who is going to draft contracts, people who is going to, look at our design of what information comes to us on the system. So it's a right blend between, contract management and the IT team, so that there's workflow that gets built, so that we can look at system integration and then revamp the whole thing so that we can have real-time data exchange.
Yeah, I think that collaboration that you're describing there, Kavina, it came through a bit in my research as well. I think there's a rising need for payroll to really be collaborating with
Yes.
IT, with finance, with especially when it comes to these initiatives, right? About especially when they're going to new countries, when they're taking on a new entity in a merger. That coordination, that program management is another key skill set that I think payroll
100%.
leaders are going to need.
Yeah.
And really be bringing together the right people to execute, right?
Yes.
And get this done right. So yeah.
Yeah, and also don't forget, when it comes to payroll, it's all about the tax engine, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's something that we are very, closely monitoring at our end and make sure that the tax engine remains up to date. Sometimes this information don't flow to the decision makers in terms of how the net pay will look like. So how we bring this in terms of like a simulation, even when it comes to decision making. So that's what I'm saying. We're disrupting the whole way of looking at payroll data. And then there's so much value that I would say underutilized because of lack of understanding. So our role today is really to educate how to translate this data in real value-added, strategies for them.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I mean, we've touched a little bit about everything, but I think what we're getting out of it right now is valuable info. I feel like we should potentially charge for that amount of infos you guys have been giving. Thank you. I would love to close with a final question to both of you. We've touched base on future of work and where the trends are going to go and the AI implication with payroll, keeping a human touch as well and understanding the complexities of the countries we're stepping in. I mean, Pete, starting with you, with all that, what are the top 3 advices you would give to companies expanding, and especially expanding into Africa? Your top 3.
Yeah. Advice. Well, it's a fantastic opportunity, fantastic time. So you're on the right path. I think it's again, go back to that vision. Like, what are you building towards, and what are you trying to become as an organization, and what do you need under the hood? What's the infrastructure you're going to need from an HR and payroll perspective to make that vision happen, right? Because it's probably bigger than Africa, or at least bigger than one pool in Africa, right? You probably maybe want to go to other countries. Or if not, maybe it's just one, that's fine. But be real about what the vision and the strategy is, and lay the foundation with the right partners and infrastructure. I think that's first. I think the other thing you have to do is be realistic about your ability to handle and understanding for that region, right? And the reasons why you do need to go and seek out some guidance, some help, unless you have an expertise in that local area, unless you have entities already, plenty of attorneys, you probably are going to be wanting to get some sort of guidance and consultation. And I think you've got to have a plan, right, beyond just what you're going to need in order to operate there. And then I think lastly, it's just about being realistic, right? I mean, having realistic expectations of what you're going to try to accomplish in the timelines that you need to accomplish it. Is that reasonable? Can you do it? Can you do what you want to do with the resources you have? Again, back to that assessment, where you want to be, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's going to tell you everything you need to know about what's there and what's not. And I think it's really about finding a partner who can absolutely match that, right? What are those needs? What are those? And again, anything you buy, I always tell folks this, I don't care what it is in HR or payroll. If you're buying something, you need to buy for where you're headed, not where you are right this moment. Too often we're solving for payroll in the moment and we're reacting. And what I think more firms need to do is look at it a little bit longer term, much longer term, and say, okay, this is what we need right now. Is it going to be what we need 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5, 10? Can it be viable for that roadmap where we're heading? And make sure that it is, and lean into a solution and a partner that's going to be viable for the long term. So really, again, I think it's assessing and understanding, being realistic about where you are, having a vision, really putting on the table, what are we good at? What are we not? And finding a partner that can be there with you for the long haul. Would be my suggestion, because it is a complex environment, holds a lot of opportunity, but you certainly shouldn't go at it alone. I would say that about any emerging market, you absolutely want to get some help, and there's plenty certainly out there.
Amazing, Pete. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, Kevina, same to you. From your experience, your top 3 advices to companies expanding into Africa.
I think it's all about the strategies and what they want to see as their goals, but then take a reality check in terms of the on-the-ground realities. Well, this is what I mean to say. So leverage payroll as a strategy instead of like a mundane task to be done, because there's so much potential here in terms of refining your goals and getting there in a very much more compliant and cost-efficient way. Number 2 is really build resilience and agility in your day-to-day. I think that's what we've learned painfully, is there is no such blueprint that will have a lifetime that over 6 months, because there's so much of geopolitical instability now in Africa that you always need to be ahead of your game, So how you build that in terms of your model is very key. Number 3, I would say really be close to your contractors, because at the end of the day, they are your client. It's not your end client is not your client. It's how you make them feel, and it's all about how you can enhance the experience through payroll.
So we build the foundation using AI. We bring a human touch to nurture the relationship with the contractors and the client themselves.
I think the beauty here is marrying all the data points to get the story right, and before we wouldn't even talk about data. Now we can validate whether we're getting right, because we have different data set, different data points, so that we know, okay, now we're on track. And packing this with the right forum is key, because at the end of the day, different stakeholders have different take of what the data is saying. But being able to translate this data, this is where I believe we can help.
Oh, thanks, Kevina. Thanks, Pete. I mean, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with the both of you. The data you've shared today, highly valuable. I mean, thank you so much for your perspective, your knowledge, your experience that you've shared. Thank you so much. I truly think there was a lot of value that people are going to get out of it. So truly, thank you for your time, Pete. Thank you very much, Kevina, as well, for sharing everything. And I look forward to chatting again about the future of AI tech and the future of work. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
thank you,
so much
Pete.
for having me.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you,
care.
guys.
Bye.